In the Middle Ages, a man was forced to sleep in the same bed with a stranger. Refusing was considered rude. Wait, it gets worse. That stranger wasn't the only one in the bed. There were 3 people, 5 people, sometimes more. People you had never met. Same blanket, same night, and nobody found it strange. Because in the Middle Ages, privacy didn't exist as a concept. The word didn't exist. A bedroom as a separate room didn't exist. There was one room. Everything happened in that room. Birth in that room. Death in that room. Cooking in that room. Sleep in that room. Mother, father, 5 children, grandmother, servant, sometimes animals. All of them. Same room, same night. There was no bedroom. Today, when you say bedroom, you have a clear image in your mind. A door, a lock, yours. That image didn't exist in the Middle Ages. A peasant's home was one room. That room was the kitchen, the living room, the workspace, the bedroom, all at once, all in the same place. The walls were stone. The floor was dirt. No windows or they were tiny. No glass. In winter, the wind came inside. The cold came inside. And there was only one way to deal with that cold. Sleeping pressed against each other. Body heat wasn't a luxury. It was a survival tool. On a January night in medieval France, the temperature inside a stone cottage could drop close to freezing. No central heating, no radiators, no insulated walls. Just one fireplace burning whatever wood could be gathered before dark. The moment that fire dimmed, everyone felt it, and everyone moved closer together, not out of affection, out of necessity. Wealthier families weren't so different. Their homes were larger, but everyone still gathered in the same room at night, because it was the only warm place, where the fireplace was. The other rooms were freezing. Wealthy households had what was called the Great Chamber, the main room where the family ate, slept, entertained, and conducted business. Lords and ladies didn't retreat to separate private bedrooms the way films make us imagine. They slept surrounded by their household. Servants slept at the foot of the bed. Guards slept near the door. Sleeping completely alone was not only unusual, it was considered undesirable, lonely, even suspicious. If you have ever walked through a medieval museum section, you have seen those enormous wooden beds. Why are they so large? Because they weren't meant for one person. A guest arriving at a wealthy home would share the bed with the host. This was hospitality. Refusing was an insult. A host who didn't offer his bed would be humiliated in the community. In inns, the situation was even more striking. You paid. You entered the room. Someone was already in the bed. A stranger. You lay down beside them. Nobody complained. Nobody found it strange. Because they had no alternative. Because this was normal. Records from medieval English inns show that innkeepers regularly assigned multiple guests to a single bed. 2 strangers, 3 strangers, sometimes 4. Travelers from different towns, different trades, different languages, all sharing the same straw mattress. And the bed wasn't only used for sleeping. There was a tradition called bundling, especially in Northern Europe, applied to engaged couples. A young man would visit the girl. By evening, it was dangerous for him to leave. The weather was bad. The road was long. It was dark. The solution? Sleeping in the same bed. A long wooden board placed between them to prevent touching. But the same bed, in full view of the family. This wasn't scandalous. It was practical. Parents approved. The community accepted it. The church tolerated it in many regions. Because the alternative was a young man traveling alone through dangerous dark roads, and that was considered far more reckless. Medieval people didn't sleep 8 uninterrupted hours. They divided the night in 2. When darkness fell, they slept. Around midnight, they woke. They stayed awake for 1 or 2 hours, then they slept again. This was called the first sleep and the second sleep. Those waking hours weren't wasted. People prayed, visited neighbors, talked with their spouse, interpreted their dreams, thought, made plans. These hours were precious, silent, dark, entirely their own. Doctors of the time wrote that these hours were the most suitable for intimacy, because the calm of the first sleep had passed. The freshness of the second sleep had not yet arrived. The person was exactly in between. Historian Roger Eckerch spent 16 years studying medieval documents, diaries, court records, medical texts, church writings, poetry. In thousands of documents he found the same phrases appearing again and again. First sleep, second sleep, the watch between sleeps. This wasn't unique to one region or one century. It was universal across medieval Europe. From England to Italy to Germany to France, everyone divided the night. The watch between sleeps had its own rituals. Some people got up and walked around the house. Some sat by the dying fire and stared into it. Some went outside and looked at the stars. In villages, neighbors would call on each other during this middle hour. Knocking on a door at midnight wasn't alarming. It was expected. This tradition lasted until the Industrial Revolution. Factories were built, shifts began, night lamps spread everywhere. People were slowly forced into the 8-hour single-block sleep pattern we consider natural today. Eckerch argues this forced shift created a deep biological disruption in human sleep, one we still feel. Millions of people wake in the middle of the night feeling anxious. They think something is wrong with them. They take medication. They see specialists. But perhaps nothing is wrong with them at all. Perhaps their body is simply remembering something ancient. The bedroom wasn't physically private, but it wasn't mentally private either. The church was there. The church decided which prayer to recite before sleeping. The church decided what to do upon waking at midnight. Which nights could spouses sleep together? Which nights were forbidden? Nights of fasting were forbidden. Nights before major religious holidays were forbidden. Sunday nights were debated. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday nights were restricted according to many interpretations. When calculated, the church interfered in the bedroom for more than a third of the year. Canon law went into extraordinary detail about intimate married life. Church manuals written for priests included specific questions to ask during confession about what happened in the bedroom. Couples were expected to confess not only what they did, but how and when and in what manner. The bedroom was never a private space, not from God, not from the priest, not from the community. You had a bedroom, but that room was never truly yours. And death made sure of that too. People were born in that room, and they died in that room. Same bed, looking at the same walls. Death hadn't been moved to hospitals yet. It was at home, visible. Children watched their elders take their last breath in the same room, sometimes lying side by side. The washing of the dead was done in that room. The laying out was done in that room. Neighbors came, relatives came. Everyone crowded into that small space. They wept, they prayed, they ate. This was called the death watch. Family members and neighbors kept vigil through the night beside the body. Candles were lit. Prayers said continuously. Nobody left the dying person alone, not for a single hour. Death was inside life. It wasn't kept separate. It wasn't hidden. Children in medieval households grew up knowing exactly what death looked like, what it sounded like, what it smelled like. They had seen it in the same room where they slept every night. This wasn't considered traumatic. It was considered education, preparation, the natural order of things. We moved death out of the home, into hospitals, into care facilities. We hide it from children. We sanitize it. And now an entire culture is terrified of something almost nobody has actually witnessed up close. The medieval bedroom didn't smell the way rooms smell today. Bathing was rare. In some regions once a month, in some places once a season. Clothes weren't changed for long periods. Animals were inside. Food remains were nearby. Chamber pots sat in the corner. Rushes and straw covered the floor, changed only occasionally. Accumulated filth compressed beneath feet for months. All these people slept pressed against each other in the same room, in the same bed. Yet there were no complaints. Because everyone was in the same condition, everyone was adapted to the same environment. A modern nose could not survive in that room, but a medieval nose wouldn't register anything unusual at all. This tells us something important about what we consider normal. Our standards of cleanliness and hygiene are entirely products of the modern world. Medieval people weren't dirty by their own standards. They were perfectly adapted to their reality, just as we are adapted to ours. An ordinary peasant's bed might be nothing more than the floor, straw, a piece of cloth on top, a covering, but a real bed with timber and a frame and proper stuffing was a sign of wealth. People left beds in their wills. They would write, "I leave my great bed to my eldest son." Beds passed between generations, repaired, preserved, handed down like land or gold. When Queen Elizabeth I of England died, her beds were listed separately in her will, among her most valuable possessions. The Great Bed of Ware was so famous in Elizabethan England that Shakespeare mentioned it. Over 3 meters wide, it could sleep 8 people comfortably. It wasn't a curiosity, it was a marvel. Bed curtains had nothing to do with decoration. They were the only privacy available. Thick fabric hanging from a wooden frame created a small enclosed world. Inside that curtained space, you were as alone as you were ever going to be. The sounds of the household continued outside, but within the curtains there was something approaching solitude. For the very wealthy, those curtained beds became elaborate works of art. Embroidered, painted. The bed was the most important piece of furniture in the house. Kings and queens conducted official business from their beds. Decisions of state were made there. It wasn't laziness. The bed was a throne. It was crowded, cold, dark, without privacy, but something real existed inside it. People touched each other in that room, with warmth, with breath, with the weight of a body beside you in the dark. Birth was there, death was there, fear was there, comfort was there. The medieval bedroom was not a retreat from the world, it was the world. Everything that mattered happened inside those walls. Life began there. Life ended there. Love existed there. Grief was carried there. God was spoken to there. Strangers were welcomed there. There were no walls between the intimate and the communal, between the private and the public, between the living and the dying. All in the same room, all on the same night, all together.